Hey everyone, welcome to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you are watching or listening to this from. My guest today is a very accomplished marketeer and a friend for years, joining me all the way from Queenstown in New Zealand. With over 15 years of expertise as a marketing leader and mentor, Maria has navigated the webs of startups and scale ups across various sectors, but with a specific focus on tech and health industries. Currently, Maria wears multiple hats as a fractional CMO for several tech businesses, using her expertise to drive strategic marketing initiatives. Simultaneously, she is the founder of Growth Squad, a full stack marketing agency dedicated to empowering ventures, startups, and scale ups to achieve global expansion. Maria, first of all, thank you so much for joining me at this late hour. I mean, it's the end of your work day, so thanks so much for taking the time.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for the fabulous introduction. That's a lot. Thank you. No, excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, honestly, the introduction, I feel, still doesn't do justice to all the stuff that you're doing at the moment. But before we get into the stuff, I do want to start by maybe let's rewind to the beginning of your journey, right? So perhaps could you take us through the early stages of your career and how you found your way into the world of marketing?
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually fell into marketing, so I didn't actually know what marketing was. So back in uni, my goal was to finish a science degree because I was doing sports science and psychology, and I wanted to open a wellbeing clinic. Took a gap year during uni to work for some bodybuilders, and I was like, oh, I'll get a taste of the fitness industry, and then I'll figure out what I want to do. Went there, topped their sales in the first 2 months, and then they started giving me more responsibilities, and I started doing more things. And they were like, do whatever as long as we're making sales. So I was like, okay, sure. So then I started doing the sales collateral, the sales promotions, the SEO, the website updates, and all this other stuff. And I was just like, oh, okay, this is fun. And I was like, well, I better go back to uni and finish this degree. Went back to uni, and I was talking to a friend. I was like, I made so much money doing whatever that was, in sales. Maybe I should go back to sales. And she was like, bro, that's actually marketing. And there you go. And that's how I was introduced to marketing. I then went on to do a degree in marketing and started my journey. So yeah, didn't know what marketing was. Now.
Yeah, well, that's a big leap, isn't it? From not knowing what marketing really even stands for to doing all the things that you're doing today. But maybe just to double tap on something interesting, Maria, which is, you have nearly 2 decades of experience in the Australia and New Zealand market, which is quite unique on its own, right? What sort of trends or consumer behaviors are you observing in this market that you believe will be particularly relevant for companies that are looking to expand globally?
That's a really good question. A lot has changed post-COVID. So I know everyone was talking about like pivoting and doing all of that jazz, which is great. But at the same time, now I see a lot of companies going global rather than just going to one country. Whereas pre-COVID, no one used to really go, oh, I'm going to go global. They'd sort of choose a market and then sort of chip away at it. So that's quite interesting to see that a lot of ANZ businesses are thinking that way. So that's one big thing that I've noticed. Another is hiring. Hiring has been really hard. I recently had a client that was in the recruitment space, and it was very interesting to sort of see the types of skills that businesses are needing to scale and how they're beginning to hire. So in terms of being more lenient to hiring across countries and things like that, especially with hybrid and remote working nowadays. And the other thing in terms of, I've just been working recently, particularly in the B2B space. So it's been harder, especially with what's been happening globally. So, the economy, the wars, the acceleration in AI, it's really sort of made people feel a bit hesitant. Obviously, you've got the early adopters that are really jumping on it and going forward, but yeah, there's been quite a few hesitations in the past 12 to 18 months with all of that happening. So those are probably some of the key things that I've seen. I guess there's like all the micro trends in terms of, social media, in terms of TikTok and the micro influencers. That's sort of been a bigger piece that, businesses should be looking at as well.
But maybe looking at marketeers in general, a lot of marketeers are looking at the ANZ market at the moment in terms of brand expansion, launching campaigns, etc. What sort of tactics would you advise for people who are trying to venture into this market, who have little or no knowledge about the ANZ space as such?
I was actually having this conversation today. It's really, I think the first thing off the bat is it's a relationship-based market. So actually being quite familiar and being or presenting the brand in a familiar light. So localization is very important. I think that's probably key when you're launching in the ANZ market. That's probably the first thing. And if you can hire someone locally to be the face of the business, that's even better, because you'll build credibility through that.
And I'm just curious, because I was reading an article about this just the other day, and something I'm also speaking to my chief revenue officer internally, which is really looking at branding as a mindset. Because and this is not just for the ANZ market. I think something I'm noticing globally is, how do you stand out as a brand in a sea of sameness? So many brands, irrespective of whether it's B2B or B2C or B2B2C, I feel like we're all floating in a sea of sameness. Brands that look similar, talk similar, walk similar. What's sort of your take on this, Maria? Because I know you're also pretty big and bullish on brand building and boosting brand equity. So what's your take on this? I mean, where is all this heading, and how are you, even with the clients that you work with, how do you advise them to stand out?
It's such an exciting space to be in, because I think this is where all my with my colors show, in terms of working for all these underdog brands for so long. So it's been really interesting. I was just actually going through an exercise with a client with a brand refresh, and we're going through tone of voice and looking at sort of where they were sitting. But it's really interesting, because everyone usually, it's safety in numbers. So everyone does the same thing, is the same thing, because it's just safer that way. So when a brand actually comes out and shows a bit of personality, it's quite jarring for a lot of founders and for a lot of teams. So this is when a lot of brands that hire me to do some of the stuff, I'm actually embedded in their team, because they need someone to sort of go, it's okay, this is normal. I know it sounds too quirky, but once they start seeing people engaging with that content more, like, they start to build that confidence around it. And it's not like saying do some crazy stuff. It's more like adding a bit of personality to the brand, adding a bit of personality and positioning to the content, using some words, colors, imagery, just to have some sort of personality. Because I feel like a lot of brands are either trying to be trendy, or end up just being flat, because, like you said, there is a sea of sameness. How do you even step out from it? So yeah.
No, I think that kind of says it, because I know you've also done a lot of work around brand building. But maybe that's a good segue into my next topic that I want to really dive deeper into, which is fractional leadership, and you working with several clients at the same time today. I know you started your marketing career with fairly mainstream corporate roles in growth and marketing, but at some point you also transitioned into this whole new sort of universe of fractional CMOs and fractional marketing leadership, right? I want you to talk me through what really prompted that pivot to happen, what influenced that decision making, and how you went about the transition itself.
I've really, as you've known me, I usually tend to go with the flow and, whatever's happening in life to sort of just lean into it. And that's also how I've ended up in the fractional space. A few years back, I was looking to move back home to New Zealand, after COVID and being away from family. So as I was doing that and trying to figure out what I wanted to do, sales leaders that I'd previously worked with, and they're like, Maria, we've gone into this startup or we're doing this venture and we need a marketer that talks sales and can get stuff done. So I was just like, well, like I'm still working full time and doing this. And so I was like, well, they're like, we only need you maybe 1 or 2 hours a week, just a little bit. Like we just need just someone that knows what they're doing just to help us out. And it started with one client that way and then another one. And then by the time I got back to New Zealand, I was like, well, maybe I could just do this, as a transitional thing. And then I picked up another client that was supposed to be only for 3 months. And then that went on to like an 18-month assignment. And then another client that was only supposed to be for a couple of months. And then now they're a regular client that I've been with for a couple of years. And it's just sort of built on from there. I actually haven't pitched for any work. I've just been pulled into different things just because of network and people that I've worked with in the past. And I guess it's like the problems that they're trying to solve sometimes are complex and they need quick answers. So apparently I'm the person they think of when that happens.
No, I think that's a great thing, Maria. And if I may, knowing you and the work you do, I am not surprised that you have, a close community of people who can reach out to you for marketing and leadership expertise that completely speaks to you and your strengths. Which I think also begs me to my next thought, which is, it kind of gives you a lot more leverage, if I may, to be able to effectively handpick the clients that you want to work with in this capacity, right? Are there some specific parameters that you use today to evaluate a client organization that approaches you for such an engagement before you sign up with them? Or what are the things that you look at? How do you evaluate the potential sort of work engagement with them, irrespective of whether it runs for a couple of weeks or months? I'm curious to hear how you go about it.
I feel like I've actually become more aware of it in the recent years. Before I used to think it was just like a hunch or, just my gut feeling. And in part it has been, but over the years I've realized it's probably maybe 3 key things I look at. One is if I can see if I could have a working relationship with the founder or the owner of the business or managing director. It's quite important for me because I don't work for companies, I work for people. And that's always been quite important to me, is that, and I think that's also why you're seeing a lot of my career. I've never worked for big brands. I've sort of grown with the company when they get to this corporate state of being. But the first thing is if I think that I'd be able to have a working relationship with the founder, it starts at a human level for me. And the second piece is whether I actually believe in the product or service that they're selling. So what's their market space like? Do I actually think that it's worthwhile? And I think my gut's been pretty good on a lot of these things. So all the startups and scale-ups I have worked with have actually had some amazing growth journeys, which has been awesome. So that, and then the third piece is everyone is always like, yeah, we're about growth, we're about change, we're all about this. And even though we may have had like extensive conversations, one key thing is, are you guys actually ready for change? Because and I have a very frank conversation, because it's like, if you want growth, you need to change. And if you're not ready to change, I'm not the right person for you. Because I might come in and look at your stuff and be like, hey, all this is wrong. Or actually, you don't need to change anything. You just need to change this system or that process, and that's all you need. The rest of it, I don't need to be a part of, and that could be it. But you need to be wholeheartedly willing to accept change and actually back it, because I think from experience I've seen that, you know, sometimes brands and companies might actually say that they want to do it, growth and change, but when it comes to the actual execution piece, it doesn't actually happen.
Maybe just going a little deeper into this space of fractional leadership, and specifically in marketing. I mean, there are so many leaders I know globally who are moving into this space, but there is also a growing number of myths around, what do fractional CMOs do, who are they, and how do they fit into an organization as such, right? So what I want to do next is maybe debunk some of those myths surrounding fractional CMOs, and get your brutally honest take on it, if that's okay with you.
No, go for it. This will be quite funny. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's see what you've got.
The first myth, which I know is also written about a lot on Google, if you just like look it up, is fractional CMOs are mostly jack of all trade generalists who can't match the deep specialty expertise of specific marketing leaders.
It's an interesting take on it, but I think it's actually that you'll find a lot of people that are in the fractional CMO space are very well experienced, and they're at a point in their career where they want to pick and choose the projects that they want to work on. So I feel like a lot of the other fractional CMOs I've spoken to are at a stage in their career where they're actually quite successful in the roles that they've had and the businesses that they've been involved with. And when you get to CMO level, you are sort of jack of all trades anyway. And if you are in that CMO space, where do you grow? I guess like the next natural step is to then be able to hone in on those skills and actually help businesses that you may not normally be able to work with if you were in that sort of company or at that level for such a long time.
Well, let's go to the second myth I have, because I've also been hearing about this, not just reading about it, but hearing in small circles of leadership. And a lot of people believe that fractional CMOs are solely focused on short-term fixes in the business, depending on where the fix needs to happen, rather than actually looking at long-term strategic initiatives.
I think that's that one is definitely a myth, because the whole point of difference for a fractional CMO versus a consultant is that the consultant is sort of that transactional, comes in, fixes it and goes away, whereas fractional CMOs are built on long-term partnerships. So a lot of the clients that I work with, I work with them maybe once or twice a year or however long, but I'm there with them throughout that journey. We've got that relationship so they can come back to me, and I am still a part of their journey. So I think that's definitely a myth.
And I also think that this myth stems from a lack of trust, between the fractional CMO and the founders or the founding team, right? Because trust and credibility with these clients is probably top priority, especially when you work on small term or short term engagements, right? Depending on the
Mm.
nature of it, but also time. Maybe something I want to ask you, Maria, how do you approach building your credibility with these clients as a fractional CMO, considering just the potentially transient nature of the role?
It's actually, yeah, it's quite interesting because I think, again, it's the roles that I'm taking up are needing someone in that role, but they may not necessarily need my role full time. And, you know, I've had clients that are like in the process of like raising funds and things like that, and they may not be able to afford me or be able to pay me, but I still am with them through that journey to go, okay, cool. When we are winning, we're winning together. When we are losing, we are losing together. So, um, uh, moments like that is sort of where it builds credibility, because then, you know, when we go out into like the startup space or things like that, that's how I get referrals, because other clients will meet my existing clients and go, hey, actually, you know, Maria actually was with us all these years, or she's been with us doing all this stuff. You should maybe have a chat to her.
Just looking at the macro environment, Maria, not just on the ANZ front, but just globally with all that is happening, I think a lot of the tech companies, especially on the startup and the scale up fronts, are
Mm,
strapped for cash, right? Let's be honest, depending on where they are in their rounds of funding or the lack thereof. So I think a fractional CMO engagement really comes handy for such companies and founding teams to really get in there, be super effective in solving some of those found
mm,
challenges, build a better foundation even, and get them up and running, right? So maybe
mm,
just to flip the previous question I asked you, how
mm.
do you, putting yourself in the shoes of a client, right? Say you are a founder and you, you don't really have any or much in-house marketing happening at the moment. How would you prepare for the start of a fractional CMO engagement?
I would look at what I can't do right now and just tell them, what can you do if this is all, if these are my gaps right now, what can you offer, and do you have the capacity to stay on with me through this journey for at least 2 years? Fractional CMO, being experienced as they are, should be able to help you fill in the gaps and go, actually, yeah, if you are lacking XYZ resources or frameworks, yes, I can do that. This is sort of how long these things normally take. And, you know, yes, I do have the capacity to stay on for that amount of time. Like having that commitment. It's almost like, you know, in senior roles, you have like those long-term incentive packages and things like that. So you can look at it from that point of view.
The next segment, I do want to really talk about Growth Squared, because I personally believe that starting your own marketing agency is a bold endeavor, but it's not as bold for someone like you, because I know you, and I wouldn't expect any less from you. But I really do want to talk about, how this whole leap happened into entrepreneurship. What got you, just waking up one morning and saying that this is exactly what I'm going to do. And I do want to hear the backstory of that, but I also want to hear, like, just it's just been some initial phases of starting Growth Squared, and what are some of those lessons that you've learned so far?
Oh gosh. It's been crazy. There was no start point to Growth Squared. It sort of was already happening for the last couple of years. I just had to stick a brand on it, and that was because I had to, you know, accounting purposes, I had to register a business, and so at the time I had to do that. But I don't think I even decided that I was going to go through with it up until maybe last year, because that's when I started doing a lot more of the fractional stuff, and I started getting more questions around, well, what do you do? Who are you? How does this work? Sort of a thing. And it sort of started the process there. But I think the learnings have been, quite hard, just because I am juggling a few things at the same time. Like, I didn't expect to take on the 3-month client that went on to 18 months. So that actually slowed down my own pipeline of trying to look for more clients. So that was definitely a learning. I was like, okay, well, either I take on longer engagements and stay on with them, or I take a whole bunch of short ones. So having that lined up is definitely one big thing to sort of learn from. The other is probably not trying to start 2 ventures at the same time. So currently I've got the Pilates studio that I've been trying to launch for about 2 years, and I was trying to time it so that I could launch it and then carry on with contracting and, building Growth Squared. But it's happened that they're both running at the same time, and now I've taken a longer engagement in, Growth Squared space, and so I can have a bit more time to focus on setting up the Pilates studio. But yeah, do one thing. that's something I would definitely say. The other is you don't always have to make a decision on the spot. I think sometimes people are like, you need a brand to start with, and and it's funny because, if you're working in the space, it's like the plumber doesn't do their own plumbing. So for a long time, I didn't have a brand. I still don't have business cards. I've managed to get a website up just because people were asking me about the same questions. And but yeah, probably one of the learnings is I wouldn't change the way that I've sort of launched the website. It's come in at a natural time. So yeah, I would say just get started and not worry too much about the peripheral things. I think they'll just come if you're doing the work. Those things will just sort of build. But the other thing I think was learning to figure out what were my services and how to position myself, because I wasn't a consultant, and then the fractional CMO space didn't really sort of exist so long ago. And so I only came across it maybe 2 years ago, and I just sort of touched on it. And then only up until last year, I sort of met the wider community, especially out in the US. There's a group of us, there's about 300 plus. And and it was quite funny, like validating each other in terms of what we're charging, what we're doing, how we're positioning ourselves, what we're calling ourselves, and all of that. So it's actually been quite an interesting journey to take with, hundreds of other people doing similar things. So that's been quite good. But yeah, I think that's probably another learning, was actually finding like-minded people, because it made me taking the jump into that space a bit more comfortable, because out here it wasn't a huge thing, and it's only this year that it started to become like this new trendy thing to do. And yeah, so it's been quite interesting. Feel the fear and do it anyway.
That could easily be on a billboard. But I think
I think it already is. It's not mine. It's not mine, by the way. So yeah.
I think it's also a lot about when you're stepping into a new space, and fractional leadership for me is still a new space. A lot of it is also about community knowledge sharing. Exactly what you just said towards the end, which is being part of small circles of similar like-minded individuals and professionals, because you also learn a lot from each other. They might be in different parts of the world, maybe doing slightly oblique things from you, but there's so much, there's so many gold nuggets in there to pick on, right? I think maybe just talking about Growth Squared a little bit more, Maria, it is a very competitive industry, especially marketing, right? And to speak to it, differentiation is obviously key. How are you, looking to distinguish Growth Squared as an agency from several others in the ANZ market?
I think I'm quite lucky that I have the experience that I've had with a lot of international brands, um, which has allowed me to build relationships and networks globally. And I know like a lot of companies that are wanting to grow and scale, one of the biggest hindrances is that they're going to have to hire these external agencies that they don't know in these different countries and do all the setup and not know anyone there. Whereas, when they work with myself and Growth Squared, there's a trusted network of relationships that have been built over, almost 2 decades. And it's having that reliability and trust in someone locally that has those relationships. And I think that's probably one of the key things is the network that's behind it. Like going from Middle East out to Europe to North America, all different places, like completely different networks to completely different go-to-markets. But, I can get on the phone today and just like call a friend out in Dubai and be like, hey, actually, I've got a client that's trying to do X, Y, Z. Do you know someone that does this? And can you help me with X, Y, Z? A lot of smaller companies would miss out on that because they would hire bigger, cumbersome, more expensive agencies to do that. Whereas, if you've got someone niche and nimble, it's easier to help out a lot of these startups and scale-ups that may not have that budget.
That's very true. I think bespoke solutions and agencies like yours could really stand out, if you ask me personally. And I think because you also work on a very relationship focused approach, right? I think that is something a lot of founders would appreciate way more than a big team swooning in and not having that sort of connect, or having disconnects around, alignment, objectives, misinterpretation of data even. So I think you certainly have that sort of differentiation factor. But Maria, tell me this: what do you think is Growth Square's biggest USP itself? Because you have a bold ambition with the agency. Because from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, your goal is to help all these ventures expand globally as much as possible. And with internationalization as the foundation of it, that's a tall order, right? So, what is Growth Square's biggest USP in that respect?
Being bold and reliable. Like, I think that's the best part about being in the space that we're in that startup and scale up space. All these founders are like, they're visionaries and they want to make these big, bold dreams and visions come to life, and they need someone reliable. And I think that's the biggest USP, is that we're not afraid to be bold and get out there and do things that people would just like think that's too big. A lot of people will say a lot of things, but they won't actually deliver on it. And I think that's sort of the flavor that we would bring into that space.
Well, on the note of bold, Maria, just looking into the future in the ANZ market, are there a couple of trends that you are really looking forward to, or betting big on already, or at least in the coming months?
Obviously, Gen AI, like that's been a massive talking point. It's quite funny because a few years ago I was using a AI tool to write a lot of my content in terms of like SEO blogs and things. So I was like, oh, my secret sauce is out. I didn't really think that ChatGPT was going to be that big. I was like, oh, you know what? I didn't think people would just mull over it. It'll be fine. And then no, it's just been exponential. I think it's going to change the way we work. So productivity is going to be huge. And I think another thing is creatives are going to become even more valuable. I know there was a meme going around where I don't know if you saw that, but where they were saying, oh, they still have to try and brief the bot to create what they need. So don't worry, guys, we're not out of a job. So I thought that was quite funny, but it's true. Like now they've got like universities and prompt cheat sheets and things like that. But yeah, I think, yeah, creatives will become more valuable. And the other thing is service providers is going to create a lot of new jobs in terms of Gen AI. So instead of robots replacing people, it'll be people that are using AI better than people doing those roles right now.
And maybe also looking into the future of the whole CMO role itself. Where do you think this is going, and where do you think the CMO role is going to fit in, say, a year from now?
It's actually quite interesting because there's been discussions around chief AI officers coming into play. And it's just like, well, how many are you going to have in the C-suite mix? Like, how many different C-level execs do you need for a business? That's quite interesting. And the other thing is CMO versus CRO, or CGOs in terms of chief growth officers. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of growth and change around what marketing does and is, because 5-10 years ago, being a technology business was one concept of how a business operated, but now every business is a technology business. They have so much of it in what they do. It's like, well, how do you then revise what marketing does, from the tech stack to the strategy, and at what point who covers what? Where does this CIO take over in terms of the tech stack and information, or was it the CTO? And how much is a CMO even needed at that point? Do they even just become a director underneath the chief growth officer that could cover sales and marketing? I think it's quite an interesting space to be in right now. I think it will take a bit of time for traditional marketing to sort of blend into those other roles, but a lot of the bigger companies and tech companies are creating a lot of those roles outside of CMO.
We're almost down to the time I had in mind, Maria. So maybe some closing thoughts before we wrap this up.
Yeah, I think it was the best time to be in marketing, because I love what I do because of the amount of learning opportunities you get. Like what we knew 10 years ago to what we know now. I sit there and look at my team nowadays and I'm like, I'm a marketing dinosaur. I'm not even that far from it. Like I grew up with technology in our generation. So it's going to be very interesting in Gen Alpha and what they see and how they market. So yeah, I think it's such an awesome space to be in, and it's such an exciting time. And I think there's, again, just so much learning. There's so many things happening and trying to stay on top of things. So yeah, I don't know. I get my news from TikTok these days. So what do I know?